The American Old West during the latter half of the 19th century represented one of the most transformative periods in United States history. Between the 1840s and the 1890s, the vast territory stretching from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast underwent rapid development, driven by economic opportunity, territorial expansion, and the promise of a new life on the frontier. This era, often romanticized in popular culture, was in reality a complex period marked by significant challenges, including the establishment of transportation networks that would connect isolated communities across thousands of miles of rugged terrain. Central to this expansion was the critical need to move people, mail, and valuable cargo across distances that seemed almost impossible to traverse. The stagecoach emerged as the primary solution to this transportation challenge, becoming the lifeline that connected frontier towns, mining camps, military outposts, and established cities. These vehicles, pulled by teams of powerful horses, carried not only passengers seeking fortune or fleeing hardship, but also mail that connected families separated by vast distances and valuable shipments including gold, silver, currency, and important documents. The stagecoach industry during this period represented a remarkable achievement in logistics and organization. Companies established extensive networks of routes, way stations, and relay points that allowed for relatively reliable transportation across the American West. However, this reliability came at a considerable cost, both financial and human. The men who drove these coaches faced constant danger from natural hazards, mechanical failures, and human threats that made every journey a test of skill, courage, and determination. This chapter explores the historical context that made the stagecoach such a vital institution in the development of the American West, examines the economic forces that drove the transportation of valuable cargo across dangerous territories, and provides insight into the profession of stagecoach driving during this remarkable period in American history. The period between 1848 and 1890 witnessed unprecedented movement of people into the western territories of the United States. Several major events catalyzed this migration, fundamentally altering the demographic and economic landscape of North America. The California Gold Rush of 1848 marked a watershed moment in American westward expansion. When James W. Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California, on January 24, 1848, news of the discovery spread rapidly across the nation and around the world. By 1849, approximately 90,000 people had made the arduous journey to California, hoping to strike it rich in the gold fields. This massive influx of population created an immediate need for infrastructure, services, and most critically, reliable transportation and communication networks. The Homestead Act of 1862 further accelerated Western settlement by offering 160 acres of public land to settlers who would improve the property and live on it for 5 years. This legislation opened vast territories to farming and ranching, creating scattered communities across the Great Plains and Western territories that desperately needed connections to established population centers. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 represented a monumental achievement in American engineering and commerce. However, despite the railroad's importance, vast areas of the West remained inaccessible by rail. Mining camps in remote mountain regions, cattle ranches on isolated plains, and frontier towns in desert territories still depended entirely on stagecoach service for their connection to the broader economy and society. The discovery of precious metals continued throughout this period, with major silver strikes in Nevada, gold discoveries in Colorado, and valuable ore deposits found across Arizona, Montana, and other western territories. Each new discovery created boomtowns almost overnight, and each boomtown required immediate transportation services to move both people and the wealth being extracted from the earth. The stagecoach industry in the American West developed into a sophisticated business operation that rivaled any contemporary enterprise in its organizational complexity and operational challenges. Several major companies dominated this industry, each managing thousands of miles of routes, hundreds of vehicles, thousands of horses, and employing numerous drivers, guards, station keepers, and support personnel. The Wells Fargo Company, established in 1852, became perhaps the most famous name associated with Western stagecoach operations. Originally founded as a banking and express company, Wells Fargo quickly expanded into transportation, recognizing that controlling the movement of goods was essential to its banking operations. By the 1860s and 1870s, Wells Fargo operated an extensive network of stagecoach routes throughout California and the Western Territories, earning a reputation for reliability and security. The Butterfield Overland Mail Company, operating from 1858 to 1861, established one of the most ambitious stagecoach routes in American history. The Butterfield route covered approximately 2,800 miles from St. Louis, Missouri, and Memphis, Tennessee, to San Francisco, California, passing through Arkansas, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. The company maintained 139 relay stations along this route and employed approximately 800 people to keep the service operating on schedule. These companies invested enormous resources in infrastructure. Way stations were established at regular intervals along major routes, typically every 10 to 15 miles. These stations served multiple purposes. They provided fresh horses to replace tired teams, offered meals and rest for passengers, employed station keepers who maintained the facilities and cared for the animals, and sometimes served as telegraph offices and local trading posts for nearby settlers. The coaches themselves represented significant capital investment. A well-built Concord coach, manufactured by Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire, could cost between $1,200 and $2,500 in the 1860s, equivalent to approximately $20,000 to $25,000 in today's currency. These vehicles featured sophisticated suspension systems using leather thoroughbraces that provided a rocking motion rather than rigid springs, making long journeys somewhat more comfortable on rough terrain. Stagecoach routes operated on strict schedules whenever possible. Companies advertised departure and arrival times, and drivers were expected to maintain these schedules despite weather, terrain challenges, and other obstacles. The mail contract requirements, established by the United States Postal Service, often included financial penalties for late deliveries, creating additional pressure on drivers and company management to maintain punctuality. The transportation of valuable cargo, particularly gold and silver from western mines to banking centers and mints, represented one of the most profitable yet dangerous aspects of stagecoach operations. Understanding the economics of this trade provides essential context for comprehending why such shipments became prime targets for criminal activity. During the peak years of Western mining operations, millions of dollars in precious metals moved through stagecoach networks annually. Gold dust and nuggets from placer mining operations, refined gold bars from smelters, and silver ingots from processing mills all required secure transportation to reach buyers, banks, and government facilities. A single stagecoach might carry cargo valued at anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 or more, representing enormous wealth in an era when an average worker earned perhaps $300 to $600 annually. The mining industry's production during this period was staggering. California's gold production peaked in the 1850s, but remained substantial through the 1880s. The Comstock lode in Nevada, discovered in 1859, produced hundreds of millions of dollars in silver and gold over subsequent decades. Colorado's mining districts yielded substantial quantities of both precious metals. Arizona's copper mines also produced significant amounts of gold and silver as byproducts. All of this wealth needed transportation to markets and financial centers. Stagecoach companies charged substantial fees for transporting valuable cargo, recognizing both the service's importance and the risks involved. Shipping rates for gold and other precious cargo could range from 1% to 5% of the shipment's value, depending on the route's danger level, distance, and current security conditions. For a $20,000 gold shipment, the transportation fee alone might reach $1,000, a substantial sum that reflected the genuine risks involved in the service. Insurance represented another significant cost in the precious metals transportation industry. Companies like Wells Fargo often self-insured their shipments, essentially guaranteeing to reimburse mining companies or individuals if cargo was lost or stolen. This practice required maintaining substantial capital reserves and created powerful incentives to prevent losses through improved security measures and careful route planning. The presence of valuable cargo created a constant security challenge. Mining companies and banks tried to maintain secrecy about shipment schedules and contents, but information often leaked through careless talk in saloons, bribes to company employees, or simple observation of unusual security preparations. Criminal networks developed sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations, tracking shipment patterns, and identifying vulnerable points along transportation routes. The men who drove stagecoaches through the American West during this era formed a distinct professional class, respected for their skills, and known for their toughness, reliability, and intimate knowledge of the routes they traveled. Understanding this profession provides insight into the capabilities and mindset of individuals like Elias Crowley, whose story forms the center of this documentary. Becoming a stagecoach driver required extensive training and experience. Most drivers began their careers working at way stations, learning to care for horses, maintain equipment, and observe experienced drivers at work. Promising candidates might advance to riding as a messenger or guard, learning routes and gaining experience handling firearms and dealing with emergency situations. Only after demonstrating reliability, sound judgment, and mastery of horse handling would an individual receive promotion to driver. The physical demands of the profession were considerable. Drivers sat exposed to all weather conditions: scorching sun, freezing cold, rain, snow, and wind, for hours at a time. Controlling a team of 4 to 6 powerful horses required constant attention and significant physical strength, particularly on mountain grades or when navigating difficult terrain. The leather reins, called ribbons in professional parlance, required skilled manipulation to communicate with each horse individually while managing the team as a unit. Route knowledge represented perhaps the most valuable skill a driver possessed. Experienced drivers memorized every mile of their routes, knowing the location of water sources, the condition of road surfaces, the steepness of grades, the sharpness of curves, and the location of potential danger points. This knowledge allowed them to maintain speed where safe, slow appropriately for hazards, and recognize when conditions deviated from normal patterns, potentially indicating ambush preparations or other threats. Drivers developed deep understanding of horse behavior and capabilities. They learned to recognize signs of fatigue, injury, or distress in their animals, and to adjust their driving to preserve the team's strength over long distances. The ability to coax maximum effort from horses when necessary, while avoiding overtaxing them under normal conditions, distinguished superior drivers from merely competent ones. The social status of stagecoach drivers varied, but generally commanded respect in frontier communities. Successful drivers earned substantial wages for the era. Experienced professionals might earn $75 to $150 per month, significantly more than average laborers. Top drivers for major companies handling valuable cargo routes could earn even more, plus bonuses for successfully completing difficult runs or defending shipments from threats. Drivers also served as unofficial ambassadors for their companies and sources of news and information for isolated communities. They carried not only mail and cargo, but also verbal messages, news of events in distant towns, and observations about conditions along the routes. In communities that might see a stagecoach only once or twice weekly, the driver's arrival represented a major event and an important connection to the wider world. The profession carried inherent dangers beyond the threat of criminal activity. Accidents occurred regularly due to terrain challenges, weather conditions, mechanical failures, or spooked horses. Drivers faced risks from flash floods in desert regions, avalanches in mountain passes, extreme heat or cold, and encounters with wildlife. Many drivers carried scars from previous accidents or confrontations, and the profession's mortality rate, while not precisely documented, was undoubtedly significant. The transportation of valuable cargo through sparsely populated territories created opportunities for criminal activity that attracted individuals and organized groups seeking to profit from the frontier's lawlessness. Understanding the nature of these threats provides important context for appreciating the challenges faced by stagecoach drivers and the companies that employed them. Criminal activity targeting stagecoaches took several forms. Opportunistic individuals might attempt robberies alone or with 1 or 2 accomplices, typically targeting coaches on isolated stretches of road where escape routes were readily available. These smaller-scale operations often focused on robbing passengers of personal valuables and mail pouches that might contain currency or other items of value. More sophisticated criminal operations involved organized groups that gathered intelligence about valuable shipments, planned ambush locations carefully, and operated with enough members to overwhelm guards and drivers through numerical advantage. These groups sometimes included individuals with inside information about shipping schedules, route changes, and cargo contents, making them particularly dangerous to transportation companies. The effectiveness of law enforcement in deterring and punishing stagecoach robbery varied greatly by location and period. In territories with sparse populations and limited government infrastructure, criminals often operated with relative impunity. County sheriffs might have jurisdiction over enormous geographic areas with limited resources to pursue suspects or conduct investigations. Federal marshals provided some law enforcement presence in territories not yet admitted to statehood, but they too faced challenges of distance, limited budgets, and political complications. Some regions developed particularly notorious reputations for criminal activity. Certain mountain passes, desert crossings, and canyon routes became known as especially dangerous, earning ominous nicknames that reflected their threatening nature. Rattlesnake Ridge, the location central to our documentary's narrative, represents a composite of such locations, places where geography provided excellent ambush opportunities and limited options for travelers to avoid or escape danger. The motivations driving individuals to attempt stagecoach robberies varied. Economic desperation during periods of drought, mining bust, or other hardships drove some to criminal activity. Others were career criminals who viewed robbery as their profession, developing expertise in planning and executing attacks. Still others were driven by various personal circumstances, including debts, family obligations, or simply the lure of quick wealth without the hard work required by legitimate pursuits. Punishments for stagecoach robbery, when criminals were caught and convicted, were severe. Courts in many jurisdictions imposed lengthy prison sentences, and some territories used capital punishment for robberies involving violence or significant losses. However, the conviction rate remained relatively low due to the challenges of gathering evidence, locating witnesses willing to testify, and capturing suspects in vast, sparsely populated territories. Stagecoach companies and their drivers employed various strategies and techniques to protect valuable shipments and reduce vulnerability to criminal attacks. These measures evolved over time as companies learned from both successful defenses and costly losses. The most visible security measure involved employing armed guards, often called messengers or shotgun riders, who accompanied drivers on routes known to be dangerous or when carrying particularly valuable cargo. These guards typically carried double-barreled shotguns loaded with buckshot, effective weapons for close-range defense against multiple attackers. Some guards also carried rifles or multiple pistols to provide various defensive options. However, the expense of employing guards meant that not every stagecoach run included this protection. Companies made risk assessments based on cargo value, recent criminal activity in the region, and available resources. Some shipments traveled with minimal security, relying instead on secrecy about timing and routing to avoid criminal attention. Drivers themselves typically carried firearms, most commonly revolvers, that could be accessed quickly if needed. However, the driver's primary responsibility remained controlling the horse team, making it difficult to use weapons effectively while also managing the coach. This reality made the driver's tactical thinking and route knowledge more important than marksmanship for many defensive situations. Some companies experimented with specially reinforced strongboxes, iron-bound chests with complex locks designed to resist quick-forced entry. The theory held that even if criminals successfully stopped a stagecoach, the time required to break into a strongbox might allow rescue parties to arrive or give the criminals reason to abandon their attempt. However, determined criminals often simply took the entire strongbox, opening it at leisure in a secure location. Route variations represented another defensive strategy. By changing departure times, using alternate paths where available, or intentionally creating uncertainty about which coaches carried valuable cargo, companies attempted to make criminal planning more difficult. However, The limited number of practical routes through most territories restricted how effectively this strategy could be employed. Communication improvements, particularly the expansion of telegraph networks, provided important security advantages. Companies could warn stations ahead of attempted robberies, request assistance from law enforcement, and coordinate defensive responses more effectively than when relying solely on physical messengers. However, telegraph lines didn't reach all areas, and even where available, the technology's limitations meant significant time might pass before help could arrive. Some regions organized citizen groups or employed private security forces to patrol particularly dangerous route sections. These efforts met with varying success, as maintaining such patrols required ongoing funding and commitment that proved difficult to sustain over time. The historical context of the American Old West during the late 19th century created unique conditions that made stagecoach transportation both essential and inherently dangerous. The convergence of vast geographic distances, scattered population centers, valuable natural resources, limited law enforcement infrastructure, and incomplete transportation networks produced an environment where skilled, courageous individuals could make crucial differences in protecting lives and property. The stagecoach industry represented a critical link in the economic development of Western territories, enabling commerce, communication, and social connections that would have otherwise been impossible. The men who drove these coaches understood that their work carried real importance beyond simply earning wages. They provided essential services that communities depended upon for survival and growth. Understanding this context allows us to appreciate the remarkable nature of incidents like the one at Rattlesnake Ridge. When faced with overwhelming odds and dangerous circumstances, the knowledge, skills, and determination that characterize the best members of this profession could produce outcomes that might otherwise seem implausible. The combination of intimate route knowledge, horse handling expertise, tactical thinking, and sheer courage gave skilled drivers capabilities that transcended simple physical confrontation. As we move forward in this documentary, we will examine the specific geographic and strategic challenges presented by locations like Rattlesnake Ridge, exploring how terrain features influenced both criminal tactics and defensive options. This foundation in historical context provides the necessary framework for understanding the remarkable events that unfolded when professional expertise confronted organized criminal activity in one of the Old West's most challenging environments. The landscape of the American Southwest during the late 19th century presented extraordinary challenges to those who attempted to traverse it. Unlike the relatively gentle terrain of the eastern United States, with its established roads, bridges, and way stations, the Western territories featured dramatic topography that could shift from flat desert plains to rugged mountain passes within a few miles. These geographic variations created natural bottlenecks and obstacles that significantly influenced transportation routes, travel times, and most critically, security considerations. Among the many challenging locations that stagecoach drivers navigated, certain places earned particular notoriety for the dangers they presented. These locations typically combined several geographic features that simultaneously made them necessary transit points and ideal locations for criminal activity. Steep grades that slowed coach speed, narrow passages that limited maneuverability, rocky terrain that provided concealment, and isolation from populated areas all contributed to making specific locations particularly threatening. Rattlesnake Ridge represents a composite of such locations, a geographic feature whose characteristics embodied the challenges faced throughout the southwestern territories. While the specific name may vary across different historical accounts and regional designations, the fundamental geographic and strategic realities remained consistent across numerous similar locations throughout Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and California during this period. This chapter examines the geographical characteristics that made locations like Rattlesnake Ridge so challenging for legitimate travelers and so attractive to those with criminal intentions. We will explore how terrain features influence tactical considerations for both attackers and defenders, analyze the environmental factors that complicated travel through such regions, and consider how skilled professionals learned to work within or around these geographic constraints. Understanding the physical environment provides essential context for appreciating the remarkable nature of successful defensive actions in such locations. When geography favored attackers and numerical superiority seemed overwhelming, the knowledge and skills that experienced frontiersmen possessed became not merely advantageous, but potentially decisive factors in survival. The southwestern territories of the United States presented a diverse and often harsh environment that shaped every aspect of frontier life. Understanding the broader geographic context helps clarify why specific locations within this region presented such significant challenges. The region's geology reflected millions of years of complex processes, including volcanic activity, tectonic uplift, erosion, and sedimentation. These processes created dramatic landscape variations, including mountain ranges rising abruptly from desert floors, deep canyons carved by seasonal water flows, extensive mesa formations topped with relatively flat surfaces, and badlands characterized by intricate erosion patterns that created maze-like terrain. Climate played an equally important role in shaping the environment and its challenges. The Southwest experiences extreme temperature variations, with summer daytime temperatures often exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter nights in elevated areas could drop well below freezing. Precipitation patterns varied dramatically both seasonally and geographically, with most areas receiving the majority of their annual rainfall during intense summer thunderstorms that could produce flash flooding in canyon systems. Vegetation adapted to these harsh conditions reflected the available water and temperature ranges. Lower elevation desert areas featured cacti, creosote bushes, and other drought-resistant plants that provided minimal shade, but could create obstacles for travelers departing from established trails. Higher elevations supported juniper, piñón pine, and in some areas, ponderosa pine forests that offered better cover, but also reduced visibility and complicated navigation. Water availability represented perhaps the most critical geographic consideration for travelers. Natural springs, seasonal streams, and rare permanent water sources determined viable travel routes and the locations of way stations. During dry seasons, water sources that appeared on maps might be completely dry, forcing travelers to carry sufficient supplies between known reliable sources or face potentially fatal dehydration. The region's fauna included numerous species adapted to harsh conditions. Beyond the rattlesnakes that gave their name to many geographic features, travelers encountered scorpions, various lizard species, coyotes, mountain lions, bears in higher elevations, and numerous bird species. While most wildlife posed minimal direct threat to humans, the presence of venomous creatures and large predators required constant awareness, particularly when camping or resting in isolated locations. Native American peoples had inhabited these territories for thousands of years before Euro-American settlement, developing sophisticated knowledge of seasonal patterns, water sources, and survival techniques suited to the environment. By the late 19th century, complex and often tragic interactions between indigenous populations and incoming settlers added additional layers of tension and occasional danger to travel through frontier territories. Geographic features designated as ridges shared certain fundamental characteristics that influenced their strategic significance. Understanding these features provides insight into why such locations became focal points for both legitimate travel and criminal activity. A ridge, in topographic terms, represents an elevated formation that typically extends as a relatively narrow crest between lower-lying areas. Ridges form through various geological processes, including erosion patterns that remove softer material while leaving harder rock formations elevated, tectonic processes that create uplifted zones, or volcanic activity that deposits material in linear patterns. Transportation routes frequently followed ridgelines, or crossed them at specific points where the elevation change could be navigated with acceptable difficulty. Ridge crossings often represented unavoidable features along any practical route between 2 points, as detouring around them might add days to travel time or lead into even more difficult terrain. The approaches to ridge crossings typically featured several challenging characteristics. Grades often steepened as routes climbed toward ridge crests, forcing horse teams to work harder and reducing travel speed significantly. The physical exertion required from animals meant that teams might need rest stops before, during, or after ascending significant grades, creating predictable locations where coaches would be moving slowly or stopped completely. Ridge crests themselves presented distinct tactical situations. The elevated position offered excellent visibility in multiple directions, allowing observers to detect approaching travelers from considerable distances. However, this same visibility made it difficult for travelers to approach undetected, and the narrow nature of many ridge crests limited options for maneuvering vehicles or horse teams. Descent grades on the far side of ridges created different challenges. Controlling a heavy coach during downhill travel required skilled brake management and careful horse handling. Steep descents forced slower speeds and demanded constant attention from drivers, reducing their ability to watch for threats or respond to unexpected situations. The terrain immediately adjacent to ridge travel routes strongly influenced tactical considerations. Rocky outcroppings provided natural concealment for observers or potential attackers, allowing them to remain hidden until travelers passed. Boulders and rock formations could serve as cover during confrontations, providing protection that travelers on exposed roadways lacked. Vegetation patterns created additional concealment opportunities in some locations, while leaving others completely exposed. Erosion patterns along ridges often created secondary features, including gullies, washes, and small canyons that could serve as concealed approach routes or escape paths. These features allowed individuals to move perpendicular to main travel routes without being visible to travelers on those routes, creating significant tactical advantages for those familiar with the local terrain. While Rattlesnake Ridge represents a composite of multiple similar locations throughout the Southwest, we can construct a detailed geographic profile that reflects the typical characteristics of such places based on historical accounts and geographic patterns common to the region. The ridge extended roughly northwest to southeast for approximately 8 miles, rising from surrounding desert terrain to create an elevated barrier that any east-west travel route in the region had to cross. The formation consisted primarily of sedimentary rocks, including sandstone and limestone layers, that erosion had carved into dramatic features over millennia. The primary wagon route crossed the ridge at a saddle point approximately midway along its length, representing the lowest and most gradual crossing option within reasonable distance. Even at this optimal crossing point, the route required ascending approximately 600 feet of elevation over roughly 2 miles of horizontal distance, creating an average grade of approximately 6%, but with some sections considerably steeper. The approach from the east began across relatively flat desert terrain, allowing coaches to maintain good speed until reaching the base of the ridge. The route then entered a broad canyon that channeled traffic toward the ridge crossing. This canyon, approximately 200 yards wide at its mouth, gradually narrowed as it ascended, reducing to perhaps 50 yards at certain points. Rocky walls rose steeply on both sides, limiting visibility to the immediate surroundings and the route ahead. Several factors made this approach particularly significant from a security standpoint. The narrowing canyon created a natural funnel effect that concentrated all traffic into a predictable path. The canyon walls provided numerous positions from which observers could watch approaching travelers without being visible themselves. The gradually steepening grade slowed coach speed progressively, ensuring that vehicles reached their slowest pace well before cresting the ridge. The ridge crest itself featured a relatively level section approximately 300 yards long, where the route traversed the saddle point. This area offered panoramic views in multiple directions, east toward the approach canyon, west toward the descent route, and north and south along the ridge line. However, the exposed nature of this position meant that travelers crossing the crest were equally visible to observers at considerable distances. Rock formations along the ridge crest created a complex landscape of boulders, outcroppings, and natural fortifications. These features, while providing excellent concealment and cover for individuals positioned among them, also created obstacles that complicated movement for horse-drawn vehicles attempting to depart from the established route. The western descent from the ridge crest presented different characteristics than the eastern approach. The route descended more steeply, dropping approximately 800 feet over roughly 1.5 miles, creating grades that required careful brake management and skilled driving. The descent path featured several sharp switchback turns where the route reversed direction to maintain manageable grades, creating points where coach speed necessarily slowed to negotiate the turn safely. A series of rock spires and pillars characterize the terrain, flanking the western descent. These formations, carved by wind and water erosion into dramatic shapes, created a maze-like landscape that extended several hundred yards on both sides of the route. The spacing between formations varied from quite wide to extremely narrow, and the ground between them featured loose rock and uneven surfaces that would challenge any vehicle attempting to travel through them. Approximately 1 mile down the western slope, the route passed through another narrowing where rock walls closed to within 30 yards on both sides. This natural gateway represented another significant tactical feature, as any traffic descending from the ridge crest necessarily passed through this constrained point. Beyond this gateway, the terrain gradually opened as the route descended to the western desert floor. The transition zone featured scattered boulders, arroyos cut by seasonal water flows, and increasingly sparse vegetation adapted to the lower elevation environment. Water availability represented a critical factor influencing both travel patterns and tactical considerations throughout the Southwest, and the Rattlesnake Ridge area reflected typical regional patterns in this regard. The primary reliable water source in the vicinity consisted of a spring located approximately 1/2 mile north of the ridge crest, accessible via a rough secondary trail that branched from the main route. This spring produced a modest but consistent flow that created a small pool and supported vegetation, noticeably denser than the surrounding area. The spring's location made it a necessary stop for many travelers, particularly those with horse teams that had worked hard during the ridge ascent. Historical records and geographic surveys from the period indicate that such isolated water sources served as critical waypoints for legitimate travelers, while simultaneously creating predictable locations where criminal observers might monitor traffic and gather intelligence about potential targets. The necessity of watering horses meant that travelers often lingered at such locations longer than they might otherwise choose, creating opportunities for observation and planning. Seasonal water sources existed at various points around the ridge, but their reliability varied dramatically with precipitation patterns and time of year. Several arroyos that appeared dry most of the year could flow with considerable volume during and immediately after summer thunderstorms. These temporary water flows created additional hazards, including flash flooding potential that could trap unwary travelers or wash out sections of roadway. Temperature patterns significantly influenced travel timing and tactical considerations. Summer temperatures in the region regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit during midday hours, creating heat stress for both horses and humans. Many experienced travelers preferred to move during early morning or evening hours, timing their passage through exposed areas like ridge crossings to avoid the most extreme heat. This predictable pattern meant that traffic often concentrated during specific time windows, potentially making it easier for criminal observers to anticipate when valuable shipments might pass. Winter conditions presented different challenges. While daytime temperatures often remained moderate, nighttime temperatures could drop to freezing or below, particularly at higher elevations like the ridge crest. Snow and ice occasionally affected the area, creating hazardous footing for horses and complicating vehicle control on grades and turns. Wind patterns represented another significant environmental factor. The ridge's elevated position and orientation created natural wind channels that could produce strong gusts, particularly during afternoon hours. Dust storms driven by high winds occasionally reduced visibility to near zero and created respiratory difficulties for both animals and humans. These conditions could force travelers to stop and wait for conditions to improve, creating additional unpredictability in travel schedules. The sun's position influenced visibility and tactical considerations throughout the day. During morning hours, travelers ascending the eastern approach faced the sun rising behind the ridge crest, potentially creating glare and reduced visibility toward the crest. During evening hours, those descending the western slope faced the setting sun, similarly affecting visibility. Experienced individuals understood these patterns and considered them when planning actions requiring optimal visual conditions. Understanding how criminal groups exploited geographic features like those at Rattlesnake Ridge provides important context for appreciating the defensive challenges faced by stagecoach drivers and the tactical thinking required to counter such threats. Criminal planning for ambush operations typically began with careful observation of travel patterns, Groups interested in targeting valuable shipments needed intelligence about schedules, routes, security measures, and cargo contents. Geographic features that forced traffic into predictable patterns made this intelligence gathering more feasible than it would be on open terrain, where routes and timing might vary more widely. The selection of specific ambush locations reflected tactical thinking about several factors, including concealment opportunities, positions providing advantage during confrontation, routes for approaching the ambush site undetected, and escape routes allowing withdrawal after an attack. Locations like Rattlesnake Ridge offered advantages in all these areas. Typical ambush configurations placed observers in elevated positions with good visibility of approach routes, allowing them to identify targets and assess security measures before committing to an attack. These forward observers might use signal systems including mirror flashes, smoke signals, or simply riding to alert the main group when potentially valuable targets approached. The main force in an ambush operation typically positioned itself in locations offering both concealment before an attack and cover during any confrontation. Rock formations, boulders, and terrain irregularities provided such positions along routes like the Rattlesnake Ridge crossing. The positioning of multiple individuals in dispersed locations created crossfire opportunities and prevented targets from identifying a single threat direction to focus defensive efforts. Some ambush tactics involved creating obstacles or apparent obstacles on the route itself, forcing coaches to stop or slow significantly. These might include rolling rocks onto the roadway, felling trees across the path, or staging what appeared to be a disabled vehicle or injured traveler. Once a coach stopped or slowed to navigate the obstacle, attackers would emerge from concealment to execute the robbery. More sophisticated operations sometimes employed a multi-stage approach where an initial contact appeared to be a simple robbery by a small group, but additional forces remained hidden to counter any defensive response or pursue anyone attempting to flee. This layered approach increased the chances of success against coaches with armed guards or drivers who might attempt to fight through a smaller attacking force. Criminal groups operating in specific territories often developed detailed knowledge of the local terrain, comparable to that possessed by legitimate residents and travelers. This knowledge allowed them to move through areas efficiently, locate defensible positions, and utilize escape routes that pursuing forces might not know existed. Some groups established camp locations in remote areas that served as bases for planning and staging operations, while remaining difficult for law enforcement to locate. Communication and coordination within criminal groups varied in sophistication. Some operations involved careful planning with assigned roles, predetermined signals, and rehearsed actions. Others reflected more improvised approaches, where individuals reacted to developing situations based on general understanding of the plan's objectives rather than specific assigned tasks. The size of criminal groups attempting ambush operations ranged from as few as 2 or 3 individuals to organized bands of 20 or more. Larger groups reflected both greater ambition regarding potential targets and the reality that successfully overwhelming armed coaches required numerical superiority. However, larger groups also created challenges including coordination difficulties, the need to divide any proceeds among more individuals, and increased likelihood that someone would provide information to authorities, either deliberately or through careless talk. Experienced stagecoach drivers approaching locations like Rattlesnake Ridge understood the geographic challenges and potential threats they faced. Their professional knowledge included tactical awareness that went well beyond simply knowing the route. Route reconnaissance represented an ongoing aspect of professional driving. Experienced drivers continuously observed their routes for changes or unusual features that might indicate problems. Fresh digging that might indicate placed obstacles. Disturbed vegetation suggesting off-road travel by multiple riders, campfire remains in unusual locations, or any other indications of human activity in normally empty areas, all warranted attention and heightened alertness. Timing decisions reflected awareness of how different times of day affected visibility, temperature, and traffic patterns. While drivers generally followed company schedules, they sometimes possessed limited discretion in timing rest stops or adjusting pace in ways that might shift their arrival at sensitive locations to more or less predictable times. Avoiding establishment of completely rigid patterns made criminal planning more difficult. Horse team management became particularly critical in challenging terrain. Drivers needed to balance the desire to maintain speed through vulnerable areas against the necessity of preserving horse strength for potential emergency situations. A team pushed too hard during normal travel might lack the reserves needed if rapid flight became necessary. Conversely, excessive caution that consistently slowed travel created longer exposure periods in dangerous areas. Observation skills extended beyond simply watching the route ahead. Peripheral vision awareness, attention to unusual sounds, monitoring horse behavior for signs of nervousness that might indicate nearby humans or predators, and maintaining awareness of wind direction and dust patterns that might reveal distant movement, all contributed to tactical awareness. Experienced drivers developed mental contingency plans for various scenarios they might encounter. If stopped by fallen rock, what actions would provide best protection while assessing whether the obstacle was natural or placed? If confronted by individuals demanding surrender, what terrain features might provide cover or escape routes? If fired upon from concealment, what actions might create confusion and opportunity to break contact rather than remaining stationary as a target? Communication with any guard or messenger accompanying the coach involved prearranged understandings about threat responses. Clear agreements about who would handle which tasks during emergencies prevented confusion and conflicting actions during critical moments when coordination might determine survival. Defensive equipment positioning reflected tactical thinking. Weapons needed to be accessible but secured against loss during normal travel over rough terrain. Ammunition supplies, while limited by weight considerations and company policies, needed to support any defensive action that might develop. Some drivers carried additional items, including field glasses for observation at distance, extra water beyond normal supplies in case of forced delay, and basic medical supplies for treating injuries. Knowledge of alternative routes, even if rougher and slower than primary roads, provided options if circumstances warranted departing from normal travel paths. Some drivers maintained awareness of game trails, old mining roads, or natural passages through terrain that would be impassable for most vehicles, but might be navigated by a skilled driver with sufficient motivation. The geographic and environmental characteristics of locations like Rattlesnake Ridge created a complex tactical environment where multiple factors interacted to influence outcomes of any confrontation between defenders and attackers. The constrained nature of primary travel routes meant that avoiding dangerous areas entirely was rarely feasible. Alternative routes either did not exist within practical distances or presented equal or greater challenges. This reality forced travelers to accept certain level of risk and rely on preparation, awareness, and tactical skill rather than simple avoidance. The balance between visibility and exposure worked both ways in ridge terrain. While elevated positions offered excellent observation ranges, they also made observers visible to those being observed. An individual watching for approaching travelers from a ridge crest position might themselves be visible to those travelers at considerable distance, potentially alerting experienced drivers that observers were present. The broken nature of ridge terrain with numerous rock formations and terrain irregularities created complex sightlines where visibility changed dramatically over short distances. A position might offer clear views in certain directions while being completely blind to other approaches. This reality meant that maintaining comprehensive awareness required either multiple observation positions or acceptance of blind spots that created vulnerability. The physical demands of terrain influenced human performance during any extended action. Moving over rough ground at altitude and temperature extremes rapidly fatigued individuals, reducing their effectiveness in both offense and defense. Groups that positioned themselves well before target arrival maintained advantage over those forced to move extensively during confrontations. Sound propagation in ridge terrain reflected complex patterns. Rock surfaces reflected and sometimes amplified sounds, making it difficult to determine direction and distance of gunfire or other noises. Wind noise could mask sounds that might otherwise provide warning. The acoustic environment created uncertainty that affected decision-making for both attackers and defenders. The availability of cover and concealment distributed unevenly across the terrain. Some positions offered excellent protection from observation and weapons fire, while others provided neither. Movement between protected positions often required exposure across open ground, creating vulnerability during transitions. Understanding these patterns allowed skilled individuals to move more safely than those unfamiliar with the specific terrain. Escape route options varied dramatically based on specific locations within the ridge area. Some positions offered multiple withdrawal routes, while others created potential traps where retreat might be blocked by terrain features. Professional assessment of any position included evaluation of not just its immediate advantages, but also options if circumstances required rapid departure. Examination of historical records from the period reveals patterns in how confrontations at challenging geographic locations typically developed, and what factors influenced their outcomes. While specific details varied across individual incidents, certain commonalities emerged that informed professional understanding of best practices. Successful defensive actions more commonly involved tactical decisions that created confusion, exploited temporary advantages, or avoided direct confrontation rather than superior firepower overcoming numerical superiority. Drivers who recognized developing threats early and took action before situations fully developed often achieved better outcomes than those who waited until confrontations became unavoidable. The psychological element in confrontations proved significant. Criminal groups anticipated easy success when they possessed overwhelming numerical advantage and controlled terrain that appeared to eliminate escape options. Actions by defenders that contradicted these expectations, demonstrating skill, determination, or unexpected capabilities, sometimes created doubt or hesitation among attackers that defenders could exploit. Incidents where defenders suffered capture or loss frequently involved situations where their options had been completely constrained before they recognized the threat. Successful ambushes typically achieved surprise that prevented defenders from utilizing whatever skills or resources they possessed. This pattern emphasized the critical importance of early threat detection and immediate response before situations fully developed. Weather and environmental factors influenced numerous historical incidents. Actions occurring during dust storms, heavy rain, or other conditions that reduced visibility and complicated coordination often produced unpredictable outcomes where neither attackers nor defenders could execute plans as intended. These conditions sometimes favored bold actions by defenders that might have been impractical under clear conditions. The role of terrain familiarity emerged clearly in historical accounts. Individuals intimately familiar with specific locations possessed enormous advantages over those operating in unfamiliar territory, regardless of other factors. This reality vindicated company policies of assigning drivers to specific routes where they could develop deep knowledge, rather than rotating them frequently across different territories. Escape and evasion proved more successful than direct confrontation in many cases, where defenders recognized threats early enough to attempt flight. Even when criminal groups possessed numerical superiority and apparent tactical advantage, the difficulty of coordinating multiple individuals across rough terrain while simultaneously pursuing a moving target created opportunities for skilled drivers to evade capture. The geographic characteristics of locations like Rattlesnake Ridge fundamentally shaped the tactical environment in which stagecoach operations occurred during the frontier period. The interplay between terrain features, environmental factors, criminal tactics, and defensive capabilities created complex situations where multiple variables influenced outcomes. Understanding this geographic context provides essential foundation for appreciating the remarkable nature of successful defensive actions in such challenging environments. When terrain favored attackers, when numerical superiority appeared overwhelming, and when escape seemed impossible, the combination of professional skill, intimate terrain knowledge, tactical thinking, and determined execution could still produce outcomes that defied conventional expectations. The landscape itself served as both obstacle and potential tool. Those who understood its characteristics deeply could utilize features that appeared to favor attackers in ways that instead created defensive opportunities. The same narrow canyons that funneled traffic predictably might offer concealment for unexpected maneuvers. The same rock formations that provided attacking positions might block coordinated pursuit. The same rough terrain that made direct escape impossible might enable indirect routes that served equally well. As we move forward in this documentary, we will examine the human element, the training, experience, mindset, and capabilities that characterize the best professionals of this era. This examination will help us understand how individuals like Elias Crowley developed the skills and knowledge that enabled them to function effectively in the challenging environments we have explored in this chapter. The geographic stage has been set. Now we turn our attention to the actors who moved across that stage, carrying with them the professional expertise that made them vital participants in the frontier economy, and occasionally called upon them to demonstrate exceptional capability under extraordinary circumstances. The stagecoach drivers of the American frontier represented a distinct professional class whose members developed specialized skills through years of training, experience, and dedication to their craft. These individuals formed the critical human link in the transportation networks that connected isolated communities, delivered essential supplies, and moved valuable cargo across thousands of miles of challenging terrain. Understanding the characteristics, training, and mindset of these professionals provides essential context for comprehending how they responded to extraordinary challenges. Elias Crowley represents a composite figure, embodying the qualities that distinguish the most capable and respected drivers of the frontier era. While individual details might vary across different historical accounts, the fundamental characteristics that made drivers like Crowley successful remained consistent throughout the profession. These individuals combined technical skills in horse handling and vehicle operation with deep environmental knowledge, tactical awareness, physical toughness, and mental resilience that enabled them to function effectively under conditions that would overwhelm less capable people. The development of such capabilities required extensive preparation. No one became an expert stagecoach driver overnight. The profession demanded years of progressive experience, learning from mentors, studying terrain and conditions, and developing the judgment that distinguished competent practitioners from true masters of the craft. This chapter explores the pathway through which individuals entered and advanced within the profession, the specific skills they developed, and the personal qualities that characterize the most successful members of this remarkable occupational group. By examining the professional journey and capabilities of drivers like Elias Crowley, we gain insight into how individuals prepared themselves for the challenges they would inevitably face. The training, knowledge, and experience they accumulated provided the foundation upon which they could build tactical responses to threatening situations. Understanding this foundation helps us appreciate the remarkable actions that occasionally became necessary when circumstances placed these professionals in situations requiring every capability they possessed. Individuals who eventually became stagecoach drivers arrived in the profession through various pathways, though certain common patterns characterized many professional journeys. Understanding these entry routes provides insight into how the profession attracted capable individuals and filtered for qualities that predicted success. Many future drivers grew up in rural environments where working with horses represented normal daily activity from early childhood. Farm work, ranch operations, and general frontier life required practical horsemanship skills that provided foundational capabilities. Young men who demonstrated particular aptitude in handling horses showed reliability in completing tasks, and expressed interest in travel and adventure, often found themselves attracted to opportunities in the transportation industry. The stagecoach companies operating throughout the West actively recruited employees through various channels. They maintained relationships with station keepers, local merchants, and community leaders who could recommend promising candidates. Company representatives visited towns along their routes, observing local young men, and sometimes directly approaching those who seemed to possess desired characteristics. Word-of-mouth recommendations from existing employees also provided important recruitment channels. Initial employment with stagecoach companies typically began in supporting roles rather than driver positions. Young men might start as stable hands at way stations, responsible for feeding and caring for the horse teams that rotated through the facility. This work, while unglamorous, provided opportunities to observe experienced drivers, learn proper horse care techniques, and demonstrate work ethic and reliability. Those who proved capable in stable work might advance to positions as hostlers, specialists responsible for rapidly changing horse teams when coaches arrived at stations. This role required speed, coordination, and the ability to handle multiple horses simultaneously while working under time pressure. Hostlers needed to assess arriving teams for signs of injury or excessive fatigue, properly harness fresh teams, and complete the entire exchange in the minimal time that schedules allowed. Some individuals entered the profession through related occupations, including freight wagon driving, working on ranches with large horse or mule teams, or even military service involving cavalry or supply wagon operations. These backgrounds provided transferable skills that could accelerate advancement into stagecoach driving positions. The messenger or guard position represented another common pathway into driving. Companies hired individuals to ride alongside drivers on routes requiring additional security. This role exposed candidates to actual route operations, allowed them to observe experienced drivers managing various situations, and demonstrated whether they possessed the courage and judgment necessary for frontier transportation work. Formal promotion to driver status typically required endorsement from experienced drivers who had observed the candidate's work, demonstration of technical competence in handling teams and vehicles, and evidence of reliable judgment and mature decision-making. Companies could not afford to place inexperienced or questionable individuals in positions where poor performance might result in lost cargo, damaged vehicles, injured passengers, or compromised company reputation. The age at which individuals achieved driver status varied considerably. Some particularly talented and ambitious young men might handle their own routes by their early 20s. Others might work in supporting roles for years before receiving promotion. Generally, companies preferred drivers with sufficient maturity to handle responsibility while still possessing the physical capabilities that the demanding work required. The technical foundation of stagecoach driving centered on the ability to control and manage horse teams effectively while operating the vehicle safely across varying terrain and conditions. These skills required extensive practice and continuous refinement throughout a driver's career. Understanding equine behavior and psychology represented fundamental knowledge for any serious horseman. Drivers needed to recognize how individual horses responded to various situations, what motivated their behavior, and how to influence their actions through appropriate handling techniques. Horses possess distinct personalities, some naturally calm and reliable, others more nervous or spirited. Successful drivers learned to read these individual characteristics and adjust their handling accordingly. Team composition involved more than simply harnessing any available horses together. Experienced drivers and station managers carefully matched animals based on their characteristics, creating teams where individual horses' strengths compensated for others' weaknesses. A particularly steady horse might be paired with a more spirited one to provide calming influence. Stronger animals might be positioned where they could compensate for smaller or weaker teammates. The physical arrangement of teams followed standard configurations that evolved through extensive practical experience. 4-horse teams represented the most common configuration for regular stagecoach operations, arranged in 2 pairs with the lead pair forward and the wheel pair closest to the vehicle. 6-horse teams might be used in particularly challenging terrain or for heavy loads, adding a middle swing pair between the leaders and wheelers. Green handling represented perhaps the most distinctive technical skill that separated truly proficient drivers from merely competent ones. Each horse in a team had individual reins running back to the driver's hands, providing direct connection and communication. Skilled drivers manipulated these multiple reins simultaneously, providing different inputs to different horses while maintaining overall team coordination. This capability allowed precise control, including turning at specific radiuses, maintaining straight lines, adjusting speed of individual horses within the team, and managing challenging terrain. The reins themselves, called ribbons in professional terminology, required proper tension and feel. Too much tension created discomfort for horses and dulled their responsiveness. Too little tension meant delayed communication and loss of precise control. Drivers developed highly sensitive touch through years of practice, feeling through the reins exactly what each horse was doing and providing appropriate guidance through subtle movements. Voice commands supplemented rein control as an important communication method. Horses learned to recognize specific verbal cues, including commands to start, stop, increase speed, slow down, turn, and backup. Experienced drivers developed characteristic ways of delivering these commands, and their regular teams learned to recognize and respond to their specific driver's voice patterns. Whip use represented a controversial but practically necessary aspect of the profession. The driver's whip served primarily as a communication tool rather than a punishment device. Skilled drivers could crack the whip near a specific horse to provide emphasis or direction without making physical contact. When physical contact occurred, it came as a light tap that served as a tension-getting stimulus, rather than painful strike. Professional drivers took pride in moving teams efficiently while minimizing whip use, viewing excessive whipping as evidence of poor skill rather than effective handling. Brake operation required constant attention and careful judgment. Stagecoaches employed mechanical brakes that the driver operated with a foot lever, applying pressure to the rear wheels through wooden blocks or metal shoes. On steep descents, proper brake management prevented excessive speed, while avoiding overheating the brake mechanisms through continuous hard application. Skilled drivers learned to apply brakes intermittently, allowing mechanisms to cool between applications while maintaining safe speed. Vehicle balance and weight distribution significantly affected handling characteristics. Drivers needed to understand how passenger positioning and cargo loading influenced the coach's behavior. They communicated with station personnel about proper load distribution, and sometimes directed passengers to shift positions to improve balance on particularly challenging route sections. Maintenance awareness formed part of professional competence. While detailed mechanical work occurred at stations with proper facilities, drivers needed to recognize signs of developing problems, including unusual sounds, changed handling characteristics, or visible damage that warranted attention. Catching problems early prevented breakdowns in remote locations where repair options might be severely limited. Beyond technical horse handling and vehicle operation skills, truly expert drivers distinguished themselves through intimate knowledge of the routes they traveled. This geographic mastery provided enormous practical advantages in normal operations and became even more critical during emergency situations. Comprehensive route knowledge began with understanding the overall journey, including total distance, major landmarks, water sources, elevation changes, and the locations of way stations. However, expert knowledge extended far beyond these basics to encompass detailed familiarity with every mile of the route. Drivers learned the characteristics of specific road sections, including surface conditions that changed seasonally, locations where drainage problems created mud during wet periods, areas where loose sand or gravel affected traction, and places where exposed bedrock provided firm surface. This knowledge allowed them to anticipate how their teams would respond and adjust their driving accordingly. Elevation profile understanding enabled drivers to manage team effort efficiently. They knew where grades would require maximum effort, where teams could rest through relatively level sections, and where descents would demand careful brake management. This knowledge informed decisions about when to push for speed and when to conserve horse strength for upcoming challenging sections. Water source locations represented critical knowledge in arid territories. Beyond the official way stations, drivers learned where natural springs, reliable streams, or other water sources existed. This information might prove essential if schedules slipped, unexpected delays occurred, or emergency situations required departing from normal stopping patterns. Visibility characteristics varied along routes based on terrain, vegetation, and sun angles at different times of day. Drivers learned where morning light might create glare, where afternoon shadows reduced visibility, where dust from other traffic might linger in still air, and where wind patterns typically cleared or concentrated dust. This knowledge informed travel timing when drivers possessed any discretion in scheduling. Weather patterns and their effects on specific route sections represented important knowledge. Certain canyons might funnel wind into powerful gusts. Particular stretches might flood during heavy rain, becoming impassable until water receded. Some areas accumulated snow that persisted long after surrounding regions had cleared. Understanding these patterns enabled anticipation of problems and informed decisions about whether to attempt travel during marginal conditions. Alternative route options, even if significantly slower or more difficult than primary roads, provided valuable knowledge for emergency situations. Drivers learned about game trails, old mining roads, seasonal passages that became navigable only during dry periods, and other potential alternatives that might serve if circumstances required departing from standard routes. Detailed terrain knowledge extended beyond the immediate roadway to include the surrounding landscape. Drivers observed and remembered the locations of rock formations, vegetation patterns, drainage channels, and other features that might serve as landmarks for navigation or provide tactical advantages during emergencies. This comprehensive awareness of the three-dimensional environment distinguished true experts from those who simply knew how to follow an established road. Continuous observation during regular travels allowed drivers to maintain current knowledge. They noted changes including new rockfalls that might indicate instability, vegetation growth that might reduce visibility, erosion that might create new hazards, or any signs of human activity in areas normally empty. This ongoing awareness kept their mental maps accurate and current. Many drivers maintained personal notes or journals documenting route details, though most relied primarily on memory rather than written records. The act of recording observations reinforced memory, and reviewing notes during off-duty time helped maintain comprehensive recall. However, the most important knowledge resided in the driver's mind, immediately accessible during operations without need to consult reference materials. Beyond technical skills and route knowledge, successful frontier drivers developed sophisticated situational awareness that enabled them to detect potential threats, recognize developing problems, and respond appropriately to changing conditions. This awareness combined observation skills, pattern recognition, and intuitive understanding developed through experience. Visual scanning patterns represented learned behaviors that allowed drivers to efficiently monitor multiple aspects of their environment. Rather than focusing narrowly on the immediate route ahead, expert drivers continuously swept their vision across a broad area, including the route, surrounding terrain, sky conditions, and any movement or changes in the landscape. This scanning occurred somewhat automatically, with conscious attention drawn to anything that appeared unusual or potentially significant. Horse behavior provided important environmental information. Experienced drivers learned to read their team's body language, recognizing when horses detected something unusual before the driver consciously identified it. Ear position, head carriage, changes in gait, and signs of nervousness all communicated information about the horse's perception of their environment. Smart drivers paid attention to these signals, investigating when horses indicated something had caught their attention. Sound awareness complemented visual observation. Drivers learned to identify normal environmental sounds and immediately recognize anything unusual. Unexpected noises including rock movements, voices carried by wind, distant gunshots, or unidentified mechanical sounds warranted investigation, or at least heightened alertness. The acoustic environment provided information that might not be visible, particularly in terrain with limited sightlines. Pattern recognition allowed experienced drivers to distinguish between normal conditions and unusual situations that might indicate problems. Fresh tracks where traffic was uncommon, disturbed vegetation suggesting recent passage, dust clouds in unexpected locations, or any deviation from expected patterns triggered alert responses. While many unusual observations had innocent explanations, investigating them provided information that supported informed decision-making. Tactical thinking involved continuously assessing the environment for potential defensive positions, escape routes, and threat locations. This assessment occurred somewhat subconsciously during normal operations, but could be brought to full conscious attention immediately when circumstances suggested possible danger. Experienced drivers maintained mental notes about where cover existed, where terrain might allow evasive maneuvers, and where they might be particularly vulnerable to observation or attack. Time awareness helped drivers maintain schedule consciousness, while also recognizing when deviations from expected timing occurred. If a normally 5-hour route segment required 6 hours, understanding what caused the delay informed whether it represented normal variation or might indicate problems. Similarly, arriving at locations earlier than expected based on actual travel speed suggested lighter loads, stronger teams, or better conditions than typical. Weather monitoring involved continuous attention to sky conditions, wind patterns, temperature changes, and other meteorological indicators. Sudden weather changes could create hazards ranging from flash flooding to reduced visibility to difficult footing for horses. Recognizing developing weather situations early allowed drivers to take protective actions or adjust travel plans before conditions became dangerous. Human presence detection represented a critical awareness element in territories where encounters with strangers might indicate threats. Drivers learned to spot signs of human activity, including tracks, campfire remains, discarded items, or actual observation of distant individuals. Determining whether such signs represented legitimate travelers, local residents, or potential threats required judgment informed by context and experience. Intuitive responses developed through extensive experience sometimes provided warnings that drivers struggled to articulate clearly. A feeling that something was wrong, even without specific evidence, might reflect subconscious processing of subtle environmental cues. Experienced professionals learned to trust these intuitions sufficiently to increase alertness and take precautionary actions, even when they couldn't immediately identify specific causes for concern. The demanding nature of stagecoach driving required robust physical capabilities and mental toughness that not all individuals possessed. Understanding these requirements helps appreciate the personal characteristics that distinguished successful long-term professionals. Physical endurance represented a fundamental requirement. Drivers spent hours at a time sitting exposed to weather while continuously managing reins, operating brakes, and maintaining alertness. The work demanded sustained physical effort rather than brief, intense exertion. Drivers needed cardiovascular fitness that allowed them to function effectively despite fatigue, temperature extremes, and limited opportunities for rest. Upper body strength, particularly in hands, wrists, forearms, and shoulders, was essential for managing heavy leather reins through extended periods. Controlling multiple horses simultaneously required applying and maintaining appropriate rein tension while making continuous adjustments. This work created fatigue that drivers had to overcome through pure determination during the latter portions of long routes. Core strength and balance enabled drivers to maintain position on the elevated driver's seat while the coach moved over rough terrain. The vehicle's motion created constant instability, and drivers needed to maintain effective working position without excessive energy expenditure on simply staying seated. Good balance came partly from natural ability but improved significantly with experience as drivers learned to anticipate and adjust to vehicle movements. Environmental tolerance allowed drivers to function effectively across extreme conditions. Summer temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, winter cold with temperatures below freezing, wind, rain, snow, and dust all represented normal working conditions that drivers had to accept and operate through. While clothing provided some protection, drivers simply endured significant environmental stress as routine aspects of their profession. Pain tolerance became necessary for dealing with minor injuries that inevitably occurred. Rope burns from reins, bruises from vehicle impacts, strain injuries from sustained physical effort, and occasional more serious injuries from accidents or other incidents all tested drivers' ability to continue functioning despite discomfort. Professional responsibilities meant that stopping due to minor injuries was rarely practical, requiring drivers to simply work through pain. Mental focus over extended periods represented a cognitive challenge equal to the physical demands. Drivers needed to maintain attention for hours at a time, continuously monitoring multiple factors including horse performance, route conditions, environmental changes, and potential threats. This sustained concentration created mental fatigue that drivers had to overcome through sheer discipline and professional commitment. Stress management skills proved essential for coping with the profession's inherent uncertainties and dangers. Drivers faced regular situations including mechanical problems, injured horses, aggressive passengers, dangerous weather, and potential criminal threats. Maintaining composure during stressful situations, making sound decisions under pressure, and avoiding panic when circumstances became difficult, distinguished successful professionals from those who broke under stress. Loneliness tolerance allowed drivers to function effectively during the extended periods away from home and family that the profession required. While way stations provided some social interaction, much of a driver's working time was spent in relative isolation with only horse teams for company. Some individuals thrived in this environment, while others found the isolation psychologically difficult. Adaptability enabled drivers to function despite disrupted routines, unexpected challenges, and constantly changing conditions. No two runs proceeded identically, and drivers needed to adjust to variations without becoming flustered or making poor decisions. Mental flexibility that allowed rapid assessment of new situations and formulation of appropriate responses characterized the most capable professionals. While the primary role of stagecoach drivers focused on safe, efficient transportation, the frontier environment required at least basic tactical knowledge and defensive capabilities. Drivers needed to understand security considerations and possess some capability to respond to threatening situations. Firearms familiarity represented expected knowledge for frontier professionals. Most drivers owned personal weapons, including revolvers and possibly rifles or shotguns. While not all drivers achieved expert marksmanship, basic competence in safe handling, loading, and firing represented minimum expected capabilities. Some drivers practiced regularly and developed considerable shooting skill, while others maintained only functional competence. Weapon selection reflected practical considerations. Revolvers offered advantages including relatively compact size, ability to fire multiple shots without reloading, and single-handed operation that allowed continued range management with the other hand. However, revolvers' limited effective range meant they served primarily as close-range defensive tools. Rifles provided greater range and accuracy, but required both hands for effective use, creating challenges for drivers who needed to maintain horse control. Defensive positioning awareness informed how drivers thought about using available cover and concealment if situations required dismounting. Understanding which terrain features would stop bullets versus merely hiding individuals from view, recognizing that lying prone presented smaller targets than standing, and knowing how to move between positions while minimizing exposure, all represented useful tactical knowledge. Threat assessment skills enabled drivers to evaluate situations and determine appropriate responses. Not every armed individual encountered represented a threat, and not every threat required violent response. Drivers needed judgment to distinguish between legitimate travelers, potential problems requiring caution, and immediate dangers requiring defensive action. De-escalation techniques provided alternatives to confrontation when possible. Many situations that might develop into violence could be resolved through calm communication, demonstration of alertness, and capability that discouraged attack, or tactical retreats that avoided confrontation entirely. Experienced drivers understood that successfully completing their runs without incident represented success regardless of whether it resulted from intimidating potential threats or simply avoiding them. Evasive driving techniques represented important defensive capabilities. Drivers learned how to maximize speed from their teams when necessary, how to execute turns sharply enough to change direction rapidly, and how to use terrain features to block lines of sight or create obstacles for pursuers. These skills required pushing vehicles and horses to performance limits that would be inappropriate during normal operations, but might prove essential during emergencies. Communication systems for seeking help varied by location and period. In areas with telegraph service, drivers might arrange predetermined signals or messages that would alert authorities to threats. In more remote territories, firing shots in specific patterns might signal distress to anyone within hearing range. Some drivers carried signal mirrors that could flash reflected sunlight to distant observers, or small amounts of powder that created visible smoke when ignited. Contingency planning represented an aspect of tactical thinking that occurred before emergencies arose. Experienced drivers mentally rehearsed responses to various threatening scenarios, considering what actions might provide best chances of successful outcomes. This advanced thinking enabled faster, more effective responses when actual threats developed. The stagecoach driving community maintained informal but powerful professional standards that influenced behavior and created pressure for excellence. Understanding this professional culture provides insight into the motivations that drove individuals to develop and maintain high levels of capability. Reputation represented a driver's most valuable professional asset. Companies, passengers, and fellow professionals all judged drivers based on their record of reliability, safety, and professionalism. A strong reputation opened opportunities for advancement to premium routes with better compensation, created job security even during economic downturns, and earned respect from peers that many drivers valued as highly as financial rewards. Never losing a shipment represented a particularly prestigious accomplishment that drivers took enormous pride in achieving. Companies publicized these records in their advertising, understanding that customers valued reliability. Drivers who maintained unblemished records over years of service earned legendary status within the profession and could command premium compensation reflecting their proven capabilities. Safety records influenced reputation significantly. While accidents occasionally occurred despite best efforts, patterns of incidents or carelessness that endangered passengers created lasting negative reputations. Conversely, drivers who handled difficult situations skillfully and maintained exceptional safety records earned commendations that enhanced their professional standing. Punctuality demonstrated professional discipline and respect for schedules, despite the challenges involved in maintaining timing across frontier distances. Companies appreciated drivers who consistently met schedules, understanding that reliability represented competitive advantage in the transportation business. Passengers also valued predictability, knowing they could plan connections and activities based on advertised arrival times. Horse care standards reflected professional ethics and practical understanding. Drivers who abused horses through excessive whipping, pushing exhausted teams beyond reasonable limits, or neglecting their animals' welfare earned negative reputations among both company management and fellow drivers. Conversely, those known for maintaining healthy, well-conditioned teams received respect for their husbandry skills. Passenger treatment separated professional drivers from merely competent ones. Courtesy, helpfulness, and concern for passenger comfort created positive experiences that passengers remembered and shared. Drivers who developed reputations for professional passenger relations became company assets that attracted business. Crisis management capability became known through the informal communication networks connecting frontier communities. Stories of drivers who handled emergencies effectively spread through conversations at way stations, saloons, and other gathering places. These accounts built or damaged reputations that followed individuals throughout their careers. Integrity in handling mail and cargo represented fundamental professional standards. Companies entrusted drivers with valuable and sometimes confidential materials, expecting absolute honesty. Any evidence of theft, tampering, or dishonesty ended careers immediately and created reputations that prevented finding work elsewhere in the industry. Mentoring newer drivers represented an informal professional obligation that experienced drivers generally accepted. Sharing knowledge, offering advice, and helping less experienced colleagues develop their skills strengthened the overall profession, while building networks of professional relationships that provided both practical benefits and personal satisfaction. While Elias Crowley represents a composite figure, embodying the characteristics of expert frontier drivers, examining his notional career and capabilities illustrates how the various elements we have discussed combine to create truly exceptional professionals. Crowley's background followed patterns typical of successful drivers. Raised on a ranch in Texas, he learned horsemanship from early childhood, developing natural comfort with horses that provided foundation for later professional skills. His family's ranching operation required hard work and reliability, instilling work ethic and sense of responsibility that served him throughout life. Entry into the stagecoach profession came through employment at a way station in his late teens, where his horse handling skills quickly became apparent. Station management noted his reliability and recommended him for advancement to hostler position, where he gained experience with the rapid team changes that stagecoach operations required. A position as messenger on a route through Arizona provided Crowley's transition into operational roles. This experience exposed him to the realities of frontier transportation, including the challenges of terrain, weather, and security concerns. He learned from experienced drivers, absorbing both technical knowledge and tactical awareness that would prove invaluable in his later career. Promotion to driver came in his early 20s, initially on less demanding routes where he could develop skills without immediately facing the most challenging conditions. His natural abilities combined with focused learning enabled rapid advancement. Within several years, he was handling demanding routes through difficult terrain, earning reputation for reliability and skill. By his late 20s and early 30s, Crowley had accumulated extensive experience across various routes and conditions. He had weathered dust storms, navigated flooded crossings, handled mechanical failures in remote locations, and dealt with difficult passengers and occasional security threats. Each experience added to his knowledge base and refined his judgment. His route knowledge had developed to truly expert levels. He could recall detailed terrain features across hundreds of miles of trails, knew water source locations that newer drivers had never discovered, and understood seasonal variations in conditions that influenced optimal travel timing. This comprehensive geographic mastery gave him options and capabilities that others lacked. Crowley's horse handling skills had evolved to virtuoso level. He could coax maximum performance from teams while maintaining their health and condition, reading individual horses' status through subtle signs, and managing teams through challenging terrain with efficiency that seemed effortless to observers, but reflected thousands of hours of practice and refinement. His situational awareness had become almost subconscious. He automatically scanned environments, detected unusual patterns, and maintained tactical understanding of his surroundings without conscious effort. This continuous awareness operated in background of his consciousness, immediately bringing potential concerns to full attention when circumstances warranted. Physically, Crowley maintained excellent condition through the demanding work itself. Years of managing reins had built powerful hands, forearms, and shoulders. Environmental exposure had toughened him against temperature extremes and weather challenges. He possessed endurance that allowed him to function effectively through extended trips despite accumulated fatigue. Mentally, he had developed the resilience and focus that characterized the profession's best practitioners. He could maintain concentration for hours, make sound decisions despite stress, and remain composed during emergencies. Experience had taught him to trust his judgment while remaining open to new information that might inform better decisions. His defensive capabilities, while not those of a professional gunfighter, reflected practical competence. He could handle firearms safely and effectively, understood tactical considerations well enough to make sound decisions during threatening situations, and possessed the courage to take necessary actions when circumstances required. Perhaps most importantly, Crowley had maintained unblemished professional record over more than a decade of service. He had never lost a shipment, never suffered preventable accident, and consistently maintained schedules despite challenging conditions. This record represented the ultimate validation of his capabilities and the primary source of the considerable professional pride he took in his work. The professional journey that produced drivers like Elias Crowley represented years of progressive development, encompassing technical skills, environmental knowledge, tactical awareness, physical capability, and mental resilience. These individuals embodied a remarkable combination of capabilities that enabled them to function effectively in one of the frontier era's most demanding and consequential professions. Understanding the depth and breadth of professional expertise that characterized the best drivers provides essential context for appreciating their responses to extraordinary challenges. When faced with situations that threaten to overwhelm them through sheer magnitude of danger or apparent impossibility of successful defense, these professionals could draw upon comprehensive skill sets and knowledge bases that gave them resources unavailable to less experienced or capable individuals. The professional standards and personal pride that motivated these individuals created powerful drives toward excellence that transcended simple economic incentives. Maintaining reputation, honoring professional obligations, and proving equal to challenges became matters of personal identity that influenced decision-making during critical moments. A professional like Crowley would exhaust every option and capability before accepting failure, driven by internal standards that demanded his absolute best effort regardless of circumstances. As we move to the final chapter of this documentary, we will examine how the geographic challenges explored in Chapter 2 and the professional capabilities detailed in this chapter came together during the remarkable incident at Rattlesnake Ridge. We will analyze how Crowley's comprehensive expertise enabled him to develop and execute tactical responses that transformed an apparently hopeless situation into a demonstration of professional mastery under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The stage has been set, the geographic environment understood, and the professional capabilities explored. Now we turn to the culminating events that tested these capabilities to their absolute limits and demonstrated how expertise, courage, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The confrontation at Rattlesnake Ridge represents a culmination of professional expertise meeting extraordinary challenge. This chapter examines the tactical principles and strategic decisions that characterize successful defensive actions during the frontier era, analyzing how experienced professionals like Elias Crowley utilized comprehensive knowledge to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. When confronting numerical superiority in challenging terrain, experienced drivers understood that direct confrontation offered minimal chance of success. The fundamental tactical principle involved recognizing threats early enough to retain decision-making initiative rather than being forced into purely reactive responses. Early threat detection provided critical advantages, observing unusual dust patterns, recognizing positioned observers, or detecting coordinated movements allowed drivers to begin formulating responses before situations fully developed. This advance warning, even if measured in minutes rather than hours, created opportunities that might not exist once confrontations became unavoidable. Initial responses typically prioritized maintaining mobility over engaging threats. A moving target presented far more difficult challenge for attackers than stationary one, particularly across rough terrain where coordination became difficult. Experienced drivers understood that their best defensive asset was often the capability to avoid confrontation entirely through superior route knowledge and horse handling skills. Comprehensive understanding of local geography provided enormous tactical advantages. Drivers who knew terrain intimately could identify routes unavailable to pursuers unfamiliar with the area. Game trails, seasonal passages, and terrain features that appeared impassable might offer options to those who knew exactly where and how to navigate them. Terrain could serve both defensively and offensively in skilled hands. Narrow passages that seemed to favor ambush could become obstacles for coordinated pursuit. Rocky areas that provided concealment for attackers could equally hide defenders executing unexpected maneuvers. Steep grades that slowed coaches during normal travel might be descended at dangerous speeds when circumstances demanded, creating separation from pursuers unwilling to take equivalent risks. Understanding human psychology provided another dimension of tactical advantage. Criminal groups expecting easy success based on numerical superiority often lacked preparation for determined resistance or unexpected tactical responses. Actions that contradicted attackers' expectations could create confusion and hesitation that defenders could exploit. Demonstrating capability and resolve sometimes deterred attacks before they fully developed. Groups planning ambushes might reconsider when intended. Victims displayed alertness, competence, and willingness to defend themselves vigorously. The psychological impact of unexpected resistance occasionally proved as significant as physical defensive actions. Successful defensive actions required careful resource management, including horse strength, ammunition supplies, and personal energy reserves. Drivers needed to balance immediate needs against potential future requirements, preserving capabilities for sustained efforts rather than exhausting resources through panic responses. Horse teams represented the primary resource requiring careful management. Pushing teams to maximum effort might create temporary speed advantages, but could exhaust animals before reaching safety. Experienced drivers understood their team's capabilities and limitations, knowing exactly how much they could demand and for how long before horses' performance would deteriorate critically. Frontier situations rarely proceeded according to plan, requiring continuous adaptation as circumstances evolved. Successful professionals maintained tactical flexibility, adjusting approaches based on developing situations rather than rigidly following predetermined plans that circumstances had rendered obsolete. This adaptability combined preparation with improvisation. Advanced contingency planning provided frameworks for responses, but specific actions required real-time decisions based on actual conditions. The balance between planning and adaptation distinguished truly expert practitioners from those with merely adequate skills. The incident at Rattlesnake Ridge demonstrated how comprehensive professional expertise could produce remarkable outcomes, even against overwhelming odds. Crowley's intimate route knowledge, superior horse handling, tactical awareness, and determined execution enabled him to transform geographic features from obstacles into advantages. The successful defense of the valuable cargo and safe completion of the journey validated years of professional development and the wisdom of company policies that prioritized driver quality over simple cost considerations. The incident became part of frontier lore, representing the capabilities that characterize the era's finest transportation professionals. The tactical principles demonstrated during this incident reflected broader lessons applicable across frontier professions. Expertise matters profoundly when confronting serious challenges. Comprehensive preparation creates capabilities that prove invaluable during emergencies. Geographic knowledge, technical skills, psychological awareness, and adaptive thinking combine to enable outcomes that might otherwise seem impossible. These lessons influenced professional practices and training approaches, reinforcing the importance of thorough preparation and continuous skill development. The incident reminded everyone involved in frontier transportation that individual excellence could make decisive differences in outcomes, validating investments in recruiting, training, and retaining truly capable professionals. The events at Rattlesnake Ridge exemplified how individual skill, knowledge, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds in frontier environments. Elias Crowley's successful defense demonstrated the profound value of professional expertise developed through years of dedication to his craft. This documentary has explored the historical context that made such incidents possible, examined the geographic challenges that characterized frontier environments, detailed the professional capabilities that distinguished expert practitioners, and analyzed the tactical principles that enabled remarkable outcomes. Together, these elements illuminate an important chapter in American frontier history, honoring the skilled professionals who connected communities and enabled economic development across challenging territories. The stagecoach era eventually passed as railroads expanded and technology evolved, but the legacy of professional excellence it represented continues to inspire. The story of Rattlesnake Ridge reminds us that expertise, courage, and determination remain powerful forces capable of achieving extraordinary results regardless of apparent obstacles.